Hello everybody. In this video, we are going to be looking at how you can use Tableau's REST API to query all of the data that's on a dashboard. So what we're looking at right now is some details about a dashboard that I have published, and this dashboard has 3 sheets that are in it that actually make up the dashboard. So the dashboard is this price tracking view, and that dashboard view is built up from these 3 components. Okay, so what does that actually look like? Here we have the dashboard. This is the price tracking one, and then these 3 charts that are, I guess, just tracking that price. You know, kind of a prop for this this demonstration. So basically we have 3 separate visuals that are all contributing to the same dashboard, and the kind of business scenario here, the real life thing that you're trying to do is you have this dashboard that's actually a composition of smaller views, and sometimes if you try to download the data for the dashboard view, then you're not going to get all of the data playing nicely between all these views. So what we're going to do in this video is we're going to use Python to make use of the REST API endpoint query view data, and that's going to be used in a way where we can say, okay, which views are contributing to this dashboard? Let's download the data individually for each of those views, and we're going to do this in a way that's not super painful. So basically, if we know which workbook we are trying to download these views from, like the dashboard view belongs to workbook X, then we could just point to that workbook and we could say, hey, I want to download all of the data that's driving these views inside this workbook that contribute to this specific dashboard. All right, so have we set the stage well enough yet? Let's find out. So just a quick note, even though we're going to be using a Python library called tableau-api-lib, everything that library is doing is just pointing to the Tableau REST API reference and implementing the functionality that's provided here. So that library cannot do anything really that these endpoints don't support, such as messing around with seeing the values inside your filters, blah, blah, blah. That's something that's more in the JavaScript API territory. The REST API doesn't support that kind of stuff. You can set filter values when you're downloading data, but you can't really see all the values that are available inside of a field. That would be a different API. And so just trying to point out that if you want to know how to use this library for more things than what we're going to be seeing here, then you can come to the Tableau REST API reference and you can see all the different endpoints that are supported. In general, all the endpoints that you see here will be mirrored in the Tableau API-lib, and you could also find this functionality in Tableau Server Client, which is another Python library that is a lot of active support from the Tableau community and Tableau itself. So let's hop into the code. And here we're in a Jupyter notebook, and we are going to import the library that we're using to talk to our Tableau environment. That's Tableau API-lib, and we import this Tableau server connection so we can talk to the server environment. And then we're going to import some extra functionality that's not really doing much except putting a nicer ribbon around the various data that we could pull from the REST API. So for example, if you want to easily work with your data that you pull about your workbooks or your views or your projects, you could deal with the raw JSON that's returned to you, or you could have these utils functions which are going to help you query things, and that just in the background takes that data and shoves it into a pandas data frame for you. So pandas is really a first-class citizen when it comes to working with data. So let's import this stuff. And here we have the configuration details. Now I'm not going to explain what all of this stuff is because we have a video for that linked in the description, getting started with Tableau API-lib. But just to summarize, I'm establishing all the details that the library needs to know about my server environment so that I can communicate with it. It's basically like if you have a door to your house, that door is locked, so not just anybody can walk into it. But if you have the key, you can get in. That's what this is doing. We're defining the way that we're going to knock on the door of our server and kind of get access. Okay, so that being said, you don't want to show this kind of stuff to anybody. I'm going to delete that personal access token at the end of this. So we have our configuration. We have a way to communicate with our server. So let's start doing that. Config is not defined. Classic. I have to actually run that code. Okay, so now that we have defined that configuration, we've signed in, we get this, which means that we are successfully signed in. That status code of 200 is a good thing. And now we're going to identify the view in the workbook that's containing the dashboard that we want to download data from. So the way that I've conceptualized this is, let me fix this typo in here. Inside a workbook. Sorry, the dashboard exists within a workbook, not a workboo. Okay, so what we're doing here is we're going to first think about, all right, what workbook is this data in? We can see that from out here in our environment. We can see that this workbook is named Query Dashboard Data. Okay, so that's one piece of the puzzle. But then you also might need to know what the actual view name of your dashboard is. So again, we could come out here and we can just see that price tracking is the actual dashboard in here. Like when we published this workbook, I selected, yes, let's publish the individual views in case we need to query data from them. And then we're also publishing the dashboard, which collects all of these views inside of it. Okay, so let's just run through this step by step and you'll get the hang of the process, I think. So we say we want to maybe filter our workbook so that we're only focusing on the one that has the data that we care about. So first we can just grab a data frame that has information about all our workbooks from the server. We can do that using tableau-api-lib's querying functions. So we can say get workbooks data frame, and if we run this, let's just preview the first row, and we can see that the data gets returned to us looking like this. So what is this? Well, it has this information about the project the workbooks are belonging to. It has information about the owner who owns this each workbook, and then the workbook ID, the workbook name, and etc. So we might want to unpack a little bit of information from this, especially if you're building an automated workflow. It might be important for you to know which project a workbook belongs to so that you can filter by project. For example, out here, this belongs inside the tutorials project. So why might you want to filter on the project? Well, imagine if I have 7 different projects and they all just happen to have a workbook that's named the same. There's nothing preventing you from doing something like that. You might have the same workbook name popping up all over the place in your server. So this is something that's just going to help us narrow down the scope of, oh, I want to download stuff from this dashboard. This dashboard belongs inside this workbook. Oh no, there are 20 different workbooks named that on my server. Well, we can avoid that conflict of having 20 overlapping workbooks if we know which project that workbook lives in. So what we're going to do is we're going to make use of another Tableau API-lib function called flatten dict column, and we're going to flatten this project information so that we can interact with it. What flatten really means is where there's information nested inside this this kind of JSON format here, or a Python dictionary, and we're going to just extract that out and cherry pick the things that are useful from there. So in this case, the things we're cherry picking are the project ID and the project name, and then we're going to add a prefix to every resulting column that just says, this is the project ID, this is the project name. So let's go ahead and run that, and we can then take a little preview of this actually. Let's do that right here. Workbooks.df.head, and we can see now that the project column has disappeared. That's because we unpacked it, and we unpacked the things that we needed, like the project ID and the project name. So now if we know that the dashboard that we want to query is actually existing inside a project called tutorials, which we saw out here, it lives in the tutorials project, we can make that information now part of a filtering process where we could filter by the project name. Okay, so now we are going to do just that. What we just said is we want to narrow down which workbooks we're looking at so we can really zone in or zoom in on our target workbook, which is the one that has the data that we're interested in. So we're going to say that our target workbook data frame is our workbooks data frame where the project name is tutorials and where the workbook's name is query dashboard data. Once again, out here, we can see that query dashboard data is the name of this workbook that's been published up to our server. Okay, so let's run this and let's get a little preview of what's inside here. We can see if we scroll over to the right, sure enough, the project name is tutorials. We have the workbook name, query dashboard data. All right, so now we know about this workbook that we're zooming in on, but we don't really want the workbook. We want the views contained within that workbook. So what we're going to do now is we're going to make use of that querying functionality of this library again. And instead of having to hit a lot of raw REST API endpoints and parse out the data ourselves, we're just going to use this handy function that says get views for workbook. This was going to return us a data frame. So it's get views for workbook data frame. It's going to give us a pandas data frame that has information about all the views that live inside whichever workbook we specify to this function. So this function needs to know about the Tableau connection that we're currently that we have established. Then it also needs to know about the workbook ID that represents the workbook whose views we are querying. So our target views are going to be the views that belong to this workbook up here that we filtered down to. So let's go ahead and run this. Make sure that we ran this, run that, run this guy, and this little line right here, don't let this intimidate you. This is just saying we have the target workbook data frame, that's this guy right here, and we want to get the ID, so we get this value right here, and then this to list and pop, that's just kind of popping out the value, the actual, this value right here as text, as a string value that we can pass into the function. Okay, so we end up querying that all the views for that workbook. Here they are. We can verify that that matches what we see out here. And good. So now what we can do is we can try to actually query the dashboard. So sometimes you might get all the data you need just from querying the dashboard, but other times what's going to happen is if you just query this view ID for the dashboard, especially if your data is at different levels of aggregation in the different sheets, what you're probably going to get is some incomplete data. Sometimes what it does is it finds the first view ID available in the dashboard and then just returns data for that view, which is a problem if you have like 10 views or 3 views like we have in this case. You don't just want data for one of those views. You want when you're downloading that dashboard's data, you think that you're going to get all the data represented in that dashboard. Now the reality is you're not going to get that all in some kind of consolidated table format, but what we can do is we can cycle through each of these views and we can produce a CSV file for each one. Let's first try just querying the dashboard view itself. And I think in this case, because all of my views are actually very similar, they're broken down by the same thing, the same timestamp or hourly value, and it's just very, very simple data that this actually ends up getting it right when we just query the dashboard. But I just want to emphasize that is not always the case, which is why we're going to do this more advanced step down here. But let's just see what this looks like. Let's say we want to query that dashboard ID. So we've gone through this process of figuring out what all those different view IDs are inside our workbook, and we've decided that this one, the view ID that actually represents the dashboard, this screen right here, we're going to download the data behind this screen. Okay, so down here, that's what we're doing. We say we have all those target views, those 4 views from above. Now we want to get the one where the name is price tracking. It's the name of our dashboard sheet. And then we're going to grab that dashboard's ID using the same process we saw above for converting that single ID value into a string of text. And then that's going to give us this dashboard ID down here, which we could pass into this REST API method of querying view data. So we query this view data. Let's run all these things. Make sure we run every cell. And then we're going to just output this, the data that's returned to us from the REST API into a CSV file. This is standard Python stuff here, but just in case this is new to you, what we're doing here is we are opening a file named this, and then we are writing the bytes. That's what this WB stands for, because this data is returned to us as bytes. So we are writing to the file, and what we are writing to that file is bytes, and then we get those bytes from this response.content. So when we queried the REST API, we stored the response from the REST API into this variable response. And one aspect of that response is the content. That's what we want here. Okay, so now that content's been written to this file, and if we open it up, we can see, okay, I downloaded data from this dashboard, and that's interesting. I'm just getting the % difference in close. But when I go out, when I go out here, it looks like I should be seeing closing prices. I should be seeing the price range as a percentage of close. And then finally down here, I should be seeing the % difference in close. So, whoops, lots of whoopses. Got to get my screen switching senses back on point. So what we end up with here is we queried that dashboard ID, and that problem that I told you about happened. Even though we passed in the dashboard ID, we wanted to get the price tracking dashboard, which is this guy right here, the entire thing. What ended up happening was those different views that exist in the dashboard. Like the REST API says, oh, you want to query this dashboard. Well, there are multiple views at play here. I don't know which one you want. I'm just going to query one of them, give you that data. So that can happen. And that's the challenge that we're trying to overcome here. So instead of just querying the dashboard view, what we're going to do is we are going to say, okay, forget about that dashboard view. I know that that dashboard is composed of 3 other views. And so I'm going to find out what those views are, which is basically, when I published the workbook, yes, I published the dashboard, but I also published all of those sheets that go into the dashboard. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take all of these views and I'm going to boot out the dashboard one, and I'm going to say, okay, for each of those views that go into the dashboard, we're going to query the view data for each of these and then store those results into a CSV file. So that's what we're doing down here. We're going to say the dashboard view name is price tracking, and we're defining that so that then we can ignore it down here. So for basically each row in our target views data frame, this .iterRows just iterates through each row in the data frame. We're going to take a look at the name of the view. And as long as the name is not equal to price tracking, then we're going to kick off this process where we say, all right, we're generating a CSV file for that view. Then we are going to query the view data for that view, whatever it is, and then we're going to spit that data out into a CSV file. So let's go ahead and run these. And we can see that all happens pretty quickly. And over here on the left, we should end up seeing some CSV files pop into the picture in just a few seconds. So now if we open up each of these, let's just once again take a look at what happened when we tried to query data for the dashboard. We didn't get all of the data that we wanted, But now if we open up each one of these views, it looks like this is the one that Tableau landed on first and said, okay, you queried your dashboard here, we found a view in there, let's give you that data. And then it forgot to give us this data and this data. So that's pretty much the end of this demonstration. It's nothing is magic here. This is just making use of the REST API endpoints that are available to us and lining them up in a way that really allows us to make something that we want to have happen come to life. In this case, if you're wanting all of the underlying data that's in a dashboard, this is a framework for you to make that happen. At the end of the day, what we really did is we said, okay, when I come in here and I say I want to query data for this dashboard, it doesn't quite get us there. It queried one of the views within here, but it's not reliably going to return us all of the data beneath all of the views that go into that dashboard. So instead, we built a process that says, forget about the dashboard itself. Let's just take a look at those views that go into the dashboard, and let's download the data for those individually and store them into a CSV file. I would also point out that you could, instead of storing these into separate CSV files, you could write them to like an Excel file as different tabs of a sheet. But I know in my real life work scenario, we don't use Microsoft products like Excel. So I think CSV format is much more universal. So that's why I've done this example with CSVs. I'll leave it as an exercise to you if you want to actually store those into a different Excel file. By the way, the pandas library, what we're using here to manage our data, pandas, you can output stuff to Excel directly from pandas. So just a hint there in case that's the route you want to go. So that wraps this up for me. I'm just going to do one last thing here, and that's obliterate all of my personal access tokens so that this guy up here that I just showed you no longer exists. All right, hope this video helps somebody out there who's trying to download data from their dashboards, and I hope to see you in future videos.